Yo, what's good everyone? Hope y'all had a great weekend. Today we're going to be taking a first look at this Week 2 NFL DraftKings main slate. What I like to do is go position by position, talk about some of the cash game plays and tournament plays that are sticking out to me here early on in the week, and then we'll wrap up the video by putting together a first look cash lineup and a first look tournament lineup. With that being said, let's dive into it. Alright, so kicking it off here with the quarterbacks, and one of the first things you'll notice is there are a handful of big names left off of the main slate this week. No Patrick Mahomes, no Justin Herbert, no Josh Allen, and no Jalen Hurts. So it's not my favorite player pool at the quarterback position on the main slate, but there are a handful of guys that are sticking out to me. The first one being Lamar Jackson here against the Miami Dolphins at $7,400. That Dolphins defense looks solid on Sunday against the Patriots, but Lamar can put up points against anybody. Love that he's playing at home. And again, I talked about this last week. When you got a quarterback who brings that rushing upside, it just gives you a safer floor and a higher ceiling. So in terms of the top tier quarterback that I like in cash initially here, Lamar is the guy that sticks out to me. Kyler Murray would usually be on my list, but that Cardinals offense did not look good on Sunday, and I think I'd rather just save the $100 and go to Lamar. Russ Wilson looks great from a GPP side of things, and I don't know if people are going to be off of him based off of last night's performance, but if they are, this is a beautiful matchup here against the Houston Texans, and there's a number of different ways that we could get contrarian with him if he ends up being popular, stacking him up with one of his running backs like Javonte Williams, and we can do that here today in a tournament lineup or something. But those are the two guys that kind of stick out to me here at the top, Lamar on the cash side of things, and Russ on the GPP side of things. Now, I wish I could dive into these players here and show you their stats from last week, but DraftKings must be sleeping this morning because they have not updated it yet, and still the stats from last year. Now, after Russ here, I do scroll down into the 6K range because Matt Stafford looks really good here at $6,300. Obviously not a great opening week for the defending Super Bowl champions and the Rams, but this is a great bounce back spot for them at home against the Atlanta Falcons. You can stack them up with Cooper Kupp, who is so expensive this week. We'll talk about him when we get to the wide receivers, but at $6,300, I like the way that Matt Stafford looks on both the cash and GPP side of things. But outside of that, not really in love with kind of the mid-tier quarterback pool. You know, Joe Burrow, probably going to bounce back after that horrendous performance in week 1. We can absolutely consider him in GPPs. You know, there's a handful of guys here that could probably have a case made on the tournament side of things. Trey Lance is an interesting one. You know, he played in that sloppy condition in Chicago this past weekend, but still has that rushing upside to where he could score a rushing touchdown or two, and has some playmakers around him, especially if Kittle comes back this week. And a decent matchup there against Seattle. Should be significantly better conditions for the 49ers offense this week, and he made some attempts to throw the ball down the field. That's what we're looking for out of Lance. We didn't see it out of Jimmy Garoppolo, so there is some interest there for me. But yeah, like I said, in general, the player pool this week at the quarterback position certainly isn't my favorite. Now moving over here to the running backs, and the running back pool this week is certainly better than the quarterback pool, but still not as good as the wide receiver pool in my opinion. We'll obviously get to that here in just a couple of minutes. You know, right away you look at Jonathan Taylor, he's damn near $10,000 already, and probably rightfully so in this matchup here against the Jags, but it's going to be really hard to afford him because, well, Cooper Kupp is also $9,900 as well. So we're probably going to have to pick between the two in our cash lineup, and even doing that makes it really tough to fill out the rest of your lineup. So I'm going to break that down here at the end of the video, and if you're with me still, if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. I got a lot of football content coming your way this year, and a lot of hockey content as well for those of you who play NHL DFS. But with that said, let's get back to the running backs here. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is very expensive. Christian McCaffrey didn't have his best game, and again, I'd love to show you that here, but DraftKings just hasn't updated anything from last week. But it wasn't his best performance, just shockingly low carries, so that was a bit of a concern. I don't know if that's due to the new quarterback change with Baker Mayfield. They want to shuffle some things up, but it was slightly concerning. I still like the matchup here against the Giants. CMC is someone who's always going to be on my radar, and you do save $1,000 off of Jonathan Taylor. So those are the top two guys here at the running back position, but very expensive to get them in your lineup. Now, let's say hypothetically we don't want to pay up for Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey this week. The next guy that really sticks out to me then is Saquon Barkley. I know they don't have the stats up yet, but they do have this update here. You can see he carried the ball for 18 times, 164 yards, and scored scored a touchdown while being heavily involved in the passing game, had 7 targets, 6 catches for 30 yards. And that's what we're looking for. Volume. Saquon looked really good on Sunday as well, kind of like the rookie Saquon Barkley that we watched. So I like him at that price in a solid matchup as well against the Carolina Panthers. Now, some solid plays here on the tournament side of things. Mixon, Swift, Connor, they stick out to me. But Fournette's really the next guy that kind of sticks out to me. Cordarrelle Patterson had no issue racking up yards against that New Orleans Saints defense last week. And Lenny Fournette looked pretty damn good himself. 21 rushing attempts, 127 yards, and caught both of his targets for 10 yards as well. He was heavily involved in the passing game last year, and it looks like he's got a similar role, at least early on this year. And at $6,700 there, I like that spot for him. Now, I mentioned Javonte Williams here as well. Good matchup against the Houston Texans, $6,500. Melvin Gordon at $6,100. Maybe it's a situation where you play both of those guys in the same tournament lineup this week to get a little more contrarian. Not crazy to think that both of those guys find the end zone considering the matchup. Last night we saw Javonte more so used in the passing game. He had 12 targets last night, and that is not sustainable, but good to see him involved in that passing game. He did, however, have fewer carries than Melvin Gordon, so that's kind of why I like the situation of playing both of them in this same tournament lineup. You probably don't need to do that in a 3-entry max or a single entry, but, the Millie Maker, that would definitely make sense. And both in the 6K range, so you're probably not going to see people do that. But kind of like that approach, you could even stack up Javonte with Russ Wilson if you wanted to, considering the pass-catching upside. I also think Antonio Gibson's at a good price here, $6,200, considering the matchup against Detroit. Only had 14 rushing attempts last week for 58 yards, but heavily involved in the passing game himself, had 8 targets for 72 yards. So I really like that. With Robinson out, seems like he's going to be the lead running back once again until he comes back at least. Now, scrolling down here a little bit, there's an interesting situation between Henderson and Akers. Now, obviously, last week it was Henderson who kind of took the reins on RB1 in that Rams offense. But the Rams offense didn't look very good either. So it will be interesting to see how they approach that running back committee this week. Probably not something I want to touch on the cash side of things, but tournament side, there might be some interest there, especially if they're both really, really low owned. That's a good matchup against Atlanta at home. And then scrolling down here in the low 5K range with the news that we got on Eli Mitchell of the San Francisco 49ers. He's going to be out for a handful of weeks with a knee injury. Jeff Wilson Jr. is now RB1 in this offense until he comes back. And it sounds like there's a competition between Mason and Price for RB2, so Wilson should be locked into an RB1 workload and a decent matchup there against Seattle. He'll definitely be a cash game consideration and tournament consideration in week 2. We then got the wide receivers here, and there's a lot to love about this position this week. Like most weeks when it comes to wide receivers, I could spend 10 minutes talking about these guys right now, but I'm not going to do that. I'll talk about the guys that are sticking out to me here early on this week, and then I will condense my wide receiver pool later on this week in both my cash and tournament videos. But the first thing that's sticking out to me here is Cooper Kupp in a great matchup at home against the Atlanta Falcons. He should have no issue racking up points here against this team, just like he did last week and just like he did all of last season. But he's very expensive there at $9,900. So, both him and JT being $9,900, we're probably going to have to pick between those two in our cash lineup. And if we don't want to do that, there's a handful of other good players here as well. I don't mind saving $1,300 and going to Devontae Adams. I believe he had 11 targets in week, 17 targets in week 1, 10 passes for 141 yards, and did score a touchdown. He's just going to be force-fed in this offense, similar to what we saw in Green Bay. So I do like him at $8,600, and that Arizona defense did not look good last week. So yeah, I prefer Kupp, but I'm okay pivoting to Adams as well and saving that money. We then got guys like Jamar Chase, Debo, Tyreek, CD, and Mike Evans. I like them on the tournament side of things this week like I do most weeks. They're top tier wide receivers. I always look at the matchups, right? But it's not crazy to think that any one of these guys could blow up any given week, so always tournament considerations. But the next cash wide receiver that really sticks out to me here is Michael Pittman Jr., especially if you can't afford to get to JT this week. it's nice to pivot to Pittman here at $6,700 in a good matchup against the Jags. Looked great in week 1 with Matt Ryan, had 13 targets in that game, brought in 9 of them for 121 yards and scored a touchdown. So I do like him still at that price of $6,700. Definitely has wide receiver number 1 upside this year. Handful of other guys that stick out to me in the 6K range on the tournament side of things. Courtland Sutton looks really nice at $6,100. You could stack him up with Russ in a good matchup against Houston. Russ took a handful of deep shots to Sutton last night, and it really didn't pay off. He didn't find the end zone, but if he keeps getting those looks, he's going to have a blow-up game sooner than later. Michael Thomas wasn't bad in his first appearance since 2021, had 8 targets and 2 touchdowns in that game. Probably more of a tournament play for me at this point, but like to see him getting back to his old ways early and often. Christian Kirk is a cash game consideration for me this week, had 12 targets in his week 1 appearance with the Jags. Only caught 6 of those, but had 117 yards and has that deep threat appeal. And then Julio Jones on the tournament side of things is definitely interesting, especially if Chris Godwin does miss time. He had 5 targets last week for 69 yards and didn't look bad at all. So stacking him up with Brady is another route that we could go as well, or just kind of play him as a one-off. And then we're going to scroll down here into the 4K range for a handful of guys that could be considered both on the cash and tournament side of things this week based off of the volume they saw in week 1. First is Corey Davis there of the New York Jets, saw 9 targets with Joe Flacco for 77 yards. If he keeps getting that volume, I'll take him at that price of $4,600. Curtis Samuel had 11 targets with the Washington Commanders and had 4 carries as well, finding the end zone. He gets a lot of those low A-dot routes, so we're probably not going to see 100-plus yards out of him, but if he has 8 receptions in this game for 55 yards, that's 13 DraftKings points, and I'll take that at that price of $4,600. And then one more guy here is Donovan Peoples-Jones, had 11 targets in week 1, and I don't mind the matchup here against the Jets. I don't know if he's going to get the same volume this week. I definitely have some concern, especially with Jacoby Brissett behind center for the Browns, but at $4,400, if the volume is there, I certainly don't mind it. And then again, we're at the low 4K range here now. I look into the 3K range later on this week, and I'll have some low-priced option for you, again, in my cash and tournament videos on Friday and Saturday. Now moving on here to the tight end position, and as much as I'd love to pay up for someone like Andrews or Waller this week in my tournament lineups, probably not going to go there on the cash side of things. I talked about that last week. Those guys are always in consideration on the tournament side of things, just like those top-tier wide receivers. But I kind of scroll down here to the 4K range initially. I like Pat Freiermuth here. He had 10 targets in his week 1 game with Mitch Trubisky. Again, kind of going off of the volume here. A decent price of $4,400. Had 75 yards in that game as well, and he's only in year 2. Looked solid as a rookie. I like the ceiling and upside for this guy, not only in week 2, but going forward in his career. Scrolling down here in the 3K range, the next guy that sticks out to me then is Hayden Hurst. He had 5 catches on 8 targets last week for 46 yards. I'll take that at $3,600 here in a decent matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. And then this is a low price punt option here. We're just going off the week 1 volume. It's Granson here of the Indianapolis Colts, and a lot of people thought that Mo Alley-Cox was going to have a decent week 1 game, and I still believe he's going to be used in the red zone going forward, but Granson saw 7 targets last week and only had 3 receptions for 22 yards, but at $2,600, if you're going to give me, let's even say 5 targets this week, I'll take it as a low price punt option. So something I need to dive into a little bit more there, but for someone who is damn near the bare minimum at the tight end position, he stuck out to me. And then we got the defenses here. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. You guys know the deal. I'll consider the 3K range for my tournament lineups. Otherwise, I just go right to the 2K range for my cash lineup. The Steelers do stick out to me here at home against the New England Patriots, who did not look very good last week against Miami. And this Steelers defense looked really good against Joe Burrow and that Bengals offense. Now, the cause for concern here is they're not going to have TJ Watt this week, which is the most important piece on this defense. So I still like them at $2,800, but obviously like them more if Watt were playing. I don't mind the Bengals here, especially with Dak Prescott being out. We're going to get Cooper Rush this week, and they're damn near the bare minimum here at $2,200. Obviously didn't look great against the Steelers last week, but we don't need much from them at all to meet value here at $2,200, especially against a backup quarterback in Cooper Rush. All right, now let's go full circle here and put together a first look cash lineup and a first look tournament lineup. We're going to start on the quarterback side of things here, and I like Matt Stafford at $6,300 and a great bounce back spot here at home against the Atlanta Falcons. And I'd love to stack him up with Cooper Kupp initially, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I like to lock in my running backs. And I kind of like Lenny this week here at $6,700. If he's going to get 20 plus rushing attempts every week and be involved in the passing game, I don't mind that at all at this price, especially considering what Patterson did to that New Orleans defense just last week. And then I want to go with Jeff Wilson here. He's a starting running back this week with Mitchell out, and a really nice price there at $5,100. Now, I'd notoriously go to a third running back here right away, but with JT and Cooper Kupp both being damn near $10,000, I kind of want to put in the wide receivers here first. And as much as I would love to go with Cooper Kupp, I'm going to save that $1,300 here and go with Devontae in a good matchup against Arizona. That's not to say later in the week I won't be on Kupp, because I likely will, but right now I kind of like the savings there with Adams. Dude had 17 targets last week, and maybe I don't expect 17 this week, but 10? You could probably lock him into that. I also like Pittman there at $6,700, getting exposure to that Indianapolis Colts offense, and he looked great in week 1. And I'm actually going to go to a tight end here because I really like Hayden Hurst at the price of $3,600. Okay, so that leaves us with $4,300 left over to fill in 3 spots, wide receiver, flex, and defense. Let's put in that Bengals defense as well and see what we're left with here. Okay, so $5,400 per position. Let's go to the flex spot here and put in another running back. I kind of like Saquon this week as well at $7,300, but that only leaves us with $3,500 left, which is okay. There's likely going to be some wide receiver in the 3K range this week that has some value to them. I just haven't dove into that quite yet. But the way this looks right now, so we got Matt Stafford here, just kind of solo. You know, he could throw it to Allen Robinson still and Higbee, get those running backs involved. Yes, we want Cooper Kupp, but he's very expensive, so I don't mind that at that price in a good matchup. We got Lenny here, we got Jeff Wilson, we got Barkley, so our 3 running backs, and then 2 really solid wide receivers in Devontae Adams and Michael Pittman Jr. We got Hayden Hurst at a good price, and the Bengals defense going against Cooper Rush. So I just need to find some value at the wide receiver position in the 3K range. Like I said, I haven't dove into that quite yet, but I gotta imagine there's some sort of value floating out there. If there happens to be, I like the way that this lineup looks. All right, now let's put together a first look tournament lineup as well. And I've talked about the Broncos quite a bit here today, so let's do a little Denver stack to kick things off. We'll go with Russ Wilson here, Broncos country. Let's ride. All right, we'll go with Javonte Williams, stack him up with a running back, and then we'll put him here with Cortland Sutton as well. So we got about $5K left over per position. Now, CMC was not at his best last week. There's a handful of people that think he's going to be injured within the first few weeks of the season as it is. Might be able to get him at lower ownership in a good matchup here against the New York Giants, so I like that play. And then going back to the wide receivers here, I like the way that Christian Kirk looked last week. 12 targets thrown his way, 117 yards. He's got that boom appeal, that deep threat appeal. And the Jags paid him this offseason, so volume should continue to go his way. I like that play there. And then Julio Jones at $5,500. I like that, especially if Chris Godwin is out this week. And then at the tight end position, I don't mind going back to Hayden Hurst at that price of $3,600. And let's just put in that Bengals defense that is dirt cheap going against that backup quarterback. So that leaves us with $4,300 here at the flex position. There's probably someone that we can find in here that looks good. We're running out that Broncos stack, so let's just run it back here a little bit with Nico Collins. I know he wasn't great in week 1, but they're likely playing from behind in this game, having to throw the ball quite a bit. So we got the Broncos stack there with Javonte and Cortland Sutton. We then got CMC there on the other running back position with Christian Kirk, Julio, and Nico at the wide receiver position, Hayden Hurst, and the Bengals defense. So little tournament lineup there with a Broncos stack. I don't mind the way that looks either. I don't love the Nico Collins play, but I'm sure we can find a better value play later on this week. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap up this video here for today. As always, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to watch the content here on this channel. If you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. I got a lot of football content coming your way this year, but in the meantime, folks, let's have ourselves a great week. I'm out of here.